Hey, Coach, thank you for joining me here. If you would introduce yourself and give us a little bit of background about you as a player and as a coach.
Well, thanks for having me, Coach.
Yeah.
My name's Christina Schwab. Maiden name was Ripp, so Christina Ripp-Schwab.
Uh-huh.
Um, and I have been involved in wheelchair basketball for the past 31 years now. I started out in wheelchair basketball as a prep player back in 1991. So I've played in all the divisions that you can play in. Um, Played all through middle school, high school, played at the collegiate level, was honored and to play for the national team for a number of years, starting in as an alternate in 1996. Made my first international team, I guess, in 1997, and then went to Worlds in 1998. Played on a couple Paralympic teams in 2000, 2004, 2008, 2016, and have been coaching since college, basically, right? We start
Sure.
as student athletes during camps and things, coaching. And then my last year as an undergraduate, I was an assistant coach for Mike Frogley at the University of Illinois. And after that, moved to Denver and coached kind of through the ranks, coached some prep basketball, then graduated to varsity, and then for the last 6 years, I was the head coach of the University of Wisconsin Whitewater women's wheelchair basketball team,
Yeah.
and just started getting my feet wet, I guess, with some more international coaching.
Uh-huh.
Was an assistant coach on the men's team for Tokyo, and last December was named to the head coach position of USA women's wheelchair basketball. So there you go.
Nice. A lot of experience at a ton of different levels. Can you share a little bit about your medals and your medal count?
Sure, certainly. So I am a three-time gold medalist in the sport of wheelchair basketball. Won gold with Team USA back in 2004, 2008, and then in 2016.
Yeah. Awesome. Yes. So I'm excited about the conversation we're going to have. Really, the focus is going to be on fundamentals of player development. And because talking as college coaches and working on national team levels and working with athletes there, the cycle, a 4-year cycle of working with USA athletes, there's a lot of development that happens in there. And it's going to be development of the individual, but it's also going to be developing of what the plan of that team is moving forward and getting to the Paralympics. So first thing is when I say and talk about fundamentals of player development, what comes to mind for you as a coach?
Well, for me, when you think about fundamentals, obviously it's like the building block of the sport, right? And then I also think that it is kind of on a spectrum, right? Like
Sure.
you have to start with your building blocks, and once you have those building blocks in place, then you can add on to that, right? And then you can continue to add on to those building blocks. So I guess when I think of fundamentals and then development of fundamentals is just kind of climbing a ladder.
Sure.
But you need to start at the baseline first, right? And you
Yeah.
need to make sure that you're really honing in those skills before you can move on to the next level.
Yeah, and I think a lot of the junior coaches that are going to be listening are thinking about a lot of their kids are at the similar level,
Mhm.
but at a national team level, classifications and years of experience can vary dramatically. That you could have a first year USA player that's a class 1 to a veteran 4 or 5, and you've got to be able to work with all them. So speaking more as a player, because you had gone through 3 different cycles winning gold, how did those vary when it came to player development for you personally as a player?
Well, that's a good question. So, I started pretty young in the sport, and I would say that, I had some basic fundamentals that were probably a little bit more advanced, and that's kind of what got me on the national team in the beginning. For
Sure.
me, it was probably, speed and chair skills that
Yeah.
what kind of got me onto that level. But maybe I wasn't the best shooter quite yet,
Sure.
right? And that's what you're going to see with those first years. They're going to have a certain level of what is the word I'm looking for? Expertise, right? In a
Yeah.
certain area where as they move along and they gain more experience and maybe they get more development, maybe they go on to college or
Mhm.
maybe they're in college right now and they need to continue to move through college to continue their development. And then by
Yeah.
the time they're kind of a veteran on the team, uh, they've gotten more skill and they've probably broadened um, their skill set, right? So they may not just be an expert in one area. They may not just
Sure.
be chair skills. Maybe now they're a really great shooter. Maybe they're a leader. There's all those soft skills too that
Yeah.
sometimes go unrecognized. But I think that those are things too that we can help as coaches, and again, go unrecognized because you're thinking of the physical skills. But I think that that's probably what you're going to see is in the difference between a first year national team member to
Yeah.
I've been on the team for 20 years.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. And so I guess to get more perspective of your experience at your different levels on it, what level of wheelchair basketball were you playing when you first started with USA Ball? Like even with trials or anything, were you just high school? Were you in college? When did you start?
Yeah, I started playing for the Lady Timberwolves out of Minnesota when I was 14. So I was a freshman in high school.
Yeah.
And at the time, there was some national team members on there. And then Deb Sunderman ultimately became the head coach of USA Women's Wheelchair Basketball. And I think it was 1995 that she had a developmental camp. And
Mhm.
so I was invited to that. So I think I was 14,
Wow.
and went to that. Um, and then continued to kind of start doing some training with the national team, and going to training camps and seeing what it was really like and being able to sink my teeth into that. Right. And
Sure.
so I definitely probably wasn't ready for that level. No, I wasn't. I didn't make the team. Right. But that
Yeah.
was okay because I was developing those fundamental skills that I needed. And I
Sure.
was learning from people that were older than me that had had time to be
Mhm.
developed. And they took the time to help me out too. So yeah, the
Yeah.
first time I made a national team, I went to a qualifier. You go to qualifiers for worlds, and I went up
Sure.
to Winnipeg, and it was my junior year of high school. So I made like a big team, like a world's
Mhm.
team, my senior year of high school, went my
Yeah.
freshman year at Illinois. So
Okay. Yeah. Yeah. Well, and so then thinking about on the development side of things, so you started in high school and you finished with your last run of USA Ball outside of college, right? You were just technically in rec ball at that point, right? You were playing with Lady Bucks and with the
yeah.
men's Bucks as well. What was it like on the third round and your experience, and what kind of player development were you working on as a player in that era?
That's a great question. So I was in my 30s, right? And
Yeah.
I was like in a very different time in my life, right? I actually had just gotten hired to coach at Whitewater,
Yeah.
before the
Yeah.
Rio games. So um, it was a lot easier when I was in college and I had people around me and that were pushing me to become better and better. But then as you get older, like I already talked about, you kind of already have gained this skill set, right? And
Mhm.
I knew I was on the team when I was older, right? I knew what I brought to the team. And so I had to maintain that, right? And so then, but also keeping a mental edge. I think as you get older and you progress, your mental fundamentals become a lot more important, right? Because
Yeah.
you may have more injuries, you may be more tired,
Mhm.
you know, and just you're at a different point in your life and you're training on your own most of the
Yeah.
time. And so making sure that you're putting yourself in situations where you're still doing things game like gets more difficult. When
Sure.
I was in college and I was training at the University of Illinois, or even in the summers, if I would come to Whitewater and train with, the men's team up here, um, there was lots of scrimmages. And so
Mhm.
you could put those skills to use. And when you're training on your own, Colorado was kind of like this island where there wasn't as many athletes. I did have some training
Yeah.
partners out there, which was great, but they weren't
Sure.
always available. Everyone's working, things like that. I had a full-time job. I had a kid. Like
Yeah.
so you had to be really concise with your time. If I only had 2 hours to get in the gym, I had to plan ahead to what I was going to be doing, right? Like if it was a shooting day, that's all I was focusing on. If it was a lifting and a conditioning day, then I had to make sure that I got those things in, but also maintaining that mental side of it as well.
And so now that you've got that full circle high school to post college experience, what fundamental skills do you think that you needed or maybe you lacked in your younger years of USA that athletes need now, or vice versa? Like imagine you're coaching these USA women now. What skills are they missing? that you had, or what skills do they have that you wish you had when you were younger?
Hmm. I don't know if there's much missing right now. It is a younger squad, but I was part of younger squads too. And I'm sure
Yeah.
that coaches that looked at those squads were like, oh, they need to work on their mental game. Right.
Yeah.
But that comes along with maturity, I think.
Mhm.
Um, I think what athletes have now is they have this opportunity of more resources than we had.
Yeah.
They have specific strength and conditioning coaches for their teams. We didn't necessarily have that unless we were in a college program, right? So those
Right.
like once I got outside of a college program, then I didn't have those resources anymore. But now athletes do have that, right? If
Yeah.
they aren't already established in a collegiate program, they've moved on or what have you,
Mhm.
there's someone there to work with them. They have access to a sports psychologist,
Yeah.
right? And we didn't always have that either. We did in some of my years, but not always.
Mhm.
And so they have this opportunity now to really work on those fundamental things, right? And I know I mentioned before the soft skills too, right? The physical skills, yeah, absolutely. You need those. Like that's what's going to get you on a team. But then all the other things and teamwork and all of that stuff, like there's just a lot more opportunity for them to really, they have more resources than we did. And that
Yeah.
sounds like, oh, I'm so old, but like, um, it's true. That's what they have
Yeah.
right now. And
Yeah.
it's awesome. It's the way it should be.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah, one of the things I think is interesting from, I guess you would say, our era of playing ball, but we kind of grew up in the same Illinois system, that the communication and the language of basketball is much different than what it is now. And I think maybe it's because, they do have a ton of resources, but a lot of the resources they have are about the flashiness of basketball. And they're not getting a lot of the like core fundamental communication skills that we have, that at any point we collectively could be a part of a team and immediately start communicating each other on the same language level, to the point where I know one of the games that we had in Chicago earlier this season, I had several of my guys come over and sit on the sideline and watch you and Natalie Schneider, playing with each other, because the communication between the two of you were just one or two words, but meant so much more. It meant multiple sentences that were broken down in a couple of words. And I'm interested to see a lot of the younger players. Do they start picking up on that? Is that something that we're going to have to teach and continue with? Have you felt like you've had to work on that in developing with some of the younger players you have now?
Absolutely. And I'm not coaching college right now, but when I was, and then when I get to the US team too, we spend a lot of time on terminology,
Sure.
right? And making sure that we are using the same terms so that we're all on the same page, because we're from different programs, right? Like
Mhm.
not everybody goes to Illinois or Whitewater or
Yeah.
Alabama, right? And so we start talking about the terminology and even just being open to like what works best, what are the majority of you saying, so that we
Yeah.
can get on the same page, right? But I think over time, like that, the terminology hasn't changed too much, right?
Sure.
And so maybe there's a little nuances here and there, but it is something that I spend a lot of time on, because communication, you want to talk about fundamentals.
Yes.
Nothing's going to work unless, in my opinion, and there's other opinions of this in coaching, but I'm from the school of thought and was trained this way, that nothing works without communication, right? And the louder the better, right? Because
Yep.
sometimes you're going to get in front of huge crowds. That's another thing that I think young athletes aren't prepared for necessarily when they get to the international scene, because here in the US we don't have big crowds. We have like mom and dad
Right.
in the stands,
Yeah.
you know but you get to a Paralympic Games or World Championships and there might be a sold out crowd,
Yeah.
and you're like, how do we talk to each other in this environment? So
Right.
yeah, we spend a lot of time on terminology, and I did that too when I was coaching prep, even, right?
Mhm.
Like it's not something that's just a national team level thing. You need to with kids, you need to start them off that way, and
Yeah.
then hopefully build, right? And within your program, hopefully you have some coaches that kind of work together so that you can all be on the same page, right? And even on a national team, right? You have your assistant coaches and they may not be from the same programs that you came from. So you have to make sure that we're communicating of what we want our athletes to say, right? So
Right.
it's that spectrum, right? Of
Yeah.
developing, again, we're back to that ladder of like, here's what we want and here's how you're going to say it. And,
Yeah.
now you got to put it together and work together and say the same things.
And we're going to have a ton of junior players that are going to say, I'm a great talker. And when they defend the ball, they say ball, 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 ball. And it's like, no, you're good at really repeating the word ball, but you're not a good talker, a good communicator. You actually might be a good talker, but not a good communicator in the listening and talking part of it.
Right.
One of the big things that I've heard from several coaches, talks or podcasts is about the two most difficult things to teach is defensive transition and talking, like communication, just because it takes more than just doing the action. It takes a mental process of it. So when we talk about communication and talking, one of the big things is using a person's name and then a directive. Because if I can say, I need help, I don't know where that help is coming from, who I'm talking to, what's going on. But if I can say, Christina, I need help, or Christina, stop baseline, that's giving detailed information. And I think a lot of our fellow teammates at our level and maybe some of the younger kids are not necessarily being taught that, or they're missing that big direction. How impactful and important is that for their development if they wanted an opportunity to go to a USA national team?
That's one of the things that we look for, right? Like specifically what kind of communicator you are. And then constantly reminding them that communication is a two-way street, right? And you said name and directive. Ron Likens just popped into my head because that was said to us from like day one, right?
Yeah.
And because you're right, if you're just yelling help, great. I think someone else is going to help you. I don't know,
Yes.
right?
Yeah.
I got my guy. What are you doing? You need help? Okay. Well, who, right? So
Right.
it's something that I've always taught too. And the most successful teams, and I don't necessarily go wins losses as successful, but like successful
Yep.
teams to me are good communicators, pick
Yep.
each other up, right? When things are hard, you communicate, you don't shut down.
Sure.
And so yeah, we definitely hone in on that. I have honed in on that as a coach with all levels. I mean, even for an example, when I coach preps, when they wouldn't talk to each other, when they wouldn't call shot, when they
Yeah.
wouldn't yell ball when they got a rebound, and then call for an outlet when they were the outlet. Like when they wouldn't do those things, I would stop practice and we would do laps, not like hard laps or anything, but they'd have to sing.
Yeah.
Because then I was like, well, you're talking,
Yeah.
right? And then so they would sing the wheels on the bus. And then I would, be like, hey, if you aren't going to talk, we're going to sing. And it would get them to talk, right? You have to make it fun too. They thought it was funny that they were singing the wheels on the bus, but then it was a little reminder to them that like, oh, I need to talk to my teammates.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. I know that a lot of junior and maybe adult coaches are struggling to get their athletes to talk. And I think it's twofold. One, the next generation is doing a lot more digital communication and not a lot of verbal communication. So they're losing a lot of those, like we said, soft skills of being able to communicate and, direct people in a certain way. The other one is that it's not cool to talk and that they want to just play silently and make contact. And it's more the oohs and ahs is what comes out of the mouth.
Right.
One of the big things that actually worked successful for me with some of my athletes was they were struggling to communicate, but I knew that they were gamers. They played video games and played online with their friends. And so we went into a 2-on-2 kind of setting, 2 offense, 2 defense playing. And I had the 2 guys that weren't really good at communicating come to the sideline. And I said, okay, all you're doing is you're controlling the defenders by giving them commands on the sideline, and the defenders can only do what you tell them to do. And all of a sudden it became like a video game that they were playing the person, and they became great communicators. And it's like finding a platform that works for these players so they can connect it. And then went, oh, I get it. I now can help my teammates out by talking.
Right. Right. And you got to find those ways. And I think you're right. It is getting harder to communicate with like this generation. But again, we got to, as coaches, we got to figure that part out. And it's tough, but like you said before too, defensive transition doesn't work without communication. It just doesn't.
Yeah.
And so, and I help coach now. I'm an assistant coach for the Mad City Badgers team. And I did talk about communication in the fall. We were at a practice and I got told, well, we're teenagers. We think we're too cool to talk. And I was like, okay, well,
There you
then
go.
we're not going to be successful. Like, that's just the way it is.
Yeah.
But I was like, well, at least you can acknowledge that. But like, you're talking to me right now.
Yeah. Yeah.
So, they're listening. They just might not be expressing. So,
Right.
yeah.
Yeah. And so that kind of, brings me to something where I'm thinking about, a varsity young lady that's listening to this podcast and thinking, okay, I want to listen to Christina and what she's going to be giving information of. But the problem is that I live so far away from my juniors program and I don't have access to my teammates or my coach. And I do a lot of training on my own. What kind of advice do you have for that young athlete when they want to develop and they want an opportunity to get to the next level?
Yeah. Well, I would say a big thing is go to camps in the summers, right? And go to as many as you're possible. I know they're expensive and things, but
Sure.
apply for grants and go to those camps because that's like an intensive amount of skill development that you're going to get in a few days, right? And then from those camps, I would say that there's takeaways from those all the time, right? Like you're not only learning team skills at camps, you're learning individual skills as well.
Mm-hmm.
And, like I said, when I first started, I had a lot of individual skills that got me probably on the national team, right? And so like that's can be maybe your foot in the door, right? Like hone in on something, but then I don't know, grab a friend, put them in your day chair, right?
Yeah.
Like do U-turns, do chair
Mm-hmm.
skills, have them run into you so you can shoot with contact, things like that. You got to be creative because like when I was training on my own as an older adult, I had to figure out ways to make it where I was still getting something out of it and I wasn't just going through the motions because it gets
Right.
easy. It's easy to go through the motions, but we need to do hard things so that we get better.
Yep. Yeah. I think a lot of times for individual athletes, it goes back to the idea of what children and what adults do is children do what makes feel good. Adults do what they need to do. And if you want to have a mindset of an elite athlete, you can't just go to the gym and just roll around and shoot some shots up. You've got to have a plan about what you're going to build. And it may be a shooting workout, but it may also be a chair skill pushing workout. It might be a ball handling one. It might be one passing off the wall or something like that. And there's a ton of athletes out there that they are elite athletes and their original background was, I was just in a gym by myself with a basketball and this is what I had to work on. So I'm excited that some of those athletes are going to have an opportunity to do that. And I echo too about summer camps. It's huge to be able to do it. Not only are you going to experience going to a college campus and being involved in that, but there's also some camps that the NWBA is going to be running and other organizations will be running that can be working too.
Right. And reach out to coaches, right? And some might have great workouts for you if they can talk to you, I know recruiting and everything like that. But there's going to be resources out there, even like your website that's going to have some fundamental things on it. Right.
Yes.
And please, for you kids that are out there working out on your own, use both hands.
Yes.
Please. Because that's a skill set that sometimes isn't there. Right. And, even if you are right-handed and you don't want to use your left, you're going to have to at some point, right? For a pass. Maybe it's not, maybe you can't shoot threes with your left hand or your non-dominant hand, but you're going to have to use it at some point to dribble, to pass, to do something with. So make sure that you're not just focusing on one side. That makes you invaluable when you can use both.
Yeah, absolutely. And it gives you a one up on any of the defenders that are defend you because they believe they're guarding your shooting hand or your ball handling hand, and being able to switch is pretty amazing skill. Yeah.
Big. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes.
Well, and let's flip the mindset now. We went from, an athlete focus, but now maybe we have a junior coach or an adult coach that has some players that they want to develop. And do you have any recommendations now that you've coached junior programs, college programs, and you've worked with adult programs too? What kind of player development pathways do you have for maybe some adults and then maybe for some juniors, maybe some tidbits or skills you could share?
that's the unique part of our sport, right? Is that like you can become an athlete in our sport at kind of anywhere on your age spectrum, right? And like
Yes.
I've met athletes and had teammates that, didn't get injured until they were later in life. And so
Hmm.
then like how do you develop them? And I mean, I guess you got to start with the fundamentals, right? Like you've got to learn how to push a chair properly. You've got
Hmm.
to learn how to dribble, right? And you take those baby steps. If you can dribble
Yep.
stationary, then move to motion dribbling, right? Put that ball in your lap twice, or put that ball in
Yeah.
your lap, take 2 pushes, dribble once, right? Once you
Yeah.
get that down, keep building on those things.
Hmm.
Same thing with juniors, right? And I hope that juniors coaches are doing that already,
Hmm.
right? But also, like, again, reach out. There's a lot of coaches out in wheelchair basketball that just want to help, and we want to see young athletes and
Yeah.
potential even older athletes, right? Like maybe someone was an athlete before they got injured and they just have a skill set already. Like
Hmm.
how can, you know, how can we make them better, and if they want to get to the next level? I've had adult athletes come into my program at Whitewater as well, right? And
Hmm.
like either got injured later in life or didn't find out about wheelchair basketball until much further after their injury. And you can still develop those athletes, right? It's going to
Sure.
take time, um, but it's almost like a junior athlete at the same
Hmm.
time, right?
Yeah.
But they might be further along in their development because they already maybe played basketball standing up, right?
Yeah.
And so they're going to have like court vision and those kind of
Hmm.
things. They just have to learn it sitting down now, and
Yeah.
that there's no double dribble.
Right.
Because I've
Right.
had those athletes that are dribbling along, they stop, and then I'm like, go again. They're like,
Yeah.
what? No, you can keep going, right?
Yeah.
Um, so I mean, I guess I don't know if that answered your question at all,
Yeah. No,
but
I think so. The last two episodes that we had with Coach Mike Frogley and then with Opie, and it's kind of interesting that all three of these conversations have kind of melded in really good spots. Is that, Opie's advice with teaching and shooting was meeting the athlete where they are is really important, and talking with the athlete if it's an adult athlete, asking questions about what their background is and what things they're working on, and maybe put them in some drills to kind of see where they're at. And then Coach Frogley bringing in the idea of like, you've got to drop the timeline, that you have a timeline for that athlete, but that timeline is not theirs. And
yeah,
that, that you've got a bunch of little prep kids that you're trying to win a national championship with, but these kids are not ready yet for that. And you may need to take 3 years to develop these kids at a certain level and go one step at a time, like you're saying, climb that ladder of drills so that they're better prepared. Because what hurts us the most is seeing a kid that has a one-handed baseball pass shot because he was told this is the way to get the ball in the basket rather than here's how you should be shooting your form. And now he has to redevelop his shooting form the whole
right,
time through juniors.
right. And then
Yeah.
they come to college, and then you try to fix all of those things, right?
You do. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. I think that's
Hmm.
a really good point of meeting athletes where they're at,
Hmm.
right? And the timeline, even that is true any level.
Yes.
College, I know that
Hmm.
you've experienced this. Sometimes you get a
Oh, yeah.
big freshman class in, and you're
Hmm.
like, ooh, in 3 years, right? And then you just have to be patient. And that's
Yeah.
the biggest thing. And especially for girls in the sport, right? I know you've
Yes.
asked me about girls in the sport. Be
Yeah.
patient, because playing junior ball, you may be the only girl on the team sometimes.
Hmm.
I was until I was like 16, right?
Yep.
And then we had some younger girls join, and then you know once I got to college, that's where the big developmental shift came in, right?
Hmm.
That's really where I think that we should be focused, is getting girls and women into college programs,
Yes.
because academically most of them are ready for that, right? Not everybody goes to college, and I understand that, but
Hmm.
if you do want to make big gains in your game, practicing 5 days a week with other people that are like-minded will help you. And coaches are willing to meet you there. I think I would
Yeah.
say, knowing the coaches in our collegiate division, those coaches are willing to meet you where you're at and still work with you. Even if you just started playing last year and you're a senior, they're
Hmm.
still going to work with you. And if you want it, then a coach is going to help you with that.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, that transitions really well into the idea of, maybe I'm a new coach and I'm going to be working with some athletes, and I do have a group of young boys and one girl or maybe two girls in there. Um, we want to keep them in the sport, like we had mentioned. Do you have any examples or ideas or just kind of advice for a new coach that wants to continue to keep them in the sport, and maybe deter them from saying or doing things that might get them out of the sport?
Well, I would deter them from thinking that maybe a male athlete is better than a female athlete, right?
Right.
And find out what the skill set is of those girls, because
Mhm.
maybe they're the best communicator that you have,
Yeah,
because sometimes that's the case, right? And so, like,
absolutely.
really, then that girl's probably going to be great on defense, right?
Mhm.
And so then, put her on defense, right?
Yeah,
And physically, sometimes girls aren't as strong as boys, right?
sure.
Sometimes, not all the time, but
Mhm.
this is what I see in my perception sometimes of junior basketball, is that the boys will be on the floor, maybe the girls will be on the bench, right?
Yeah.
But I encourage coaches to find out where their athletes are and
Mhm.
what their strengths are, and then utilize that and encourage that and grow that, right? And if they're struggling in one area, if they're struggling in shooting, take that extra time to help that athlete out. Because if they want it, then they have the opportunity, to move forward in the sport. There's, even if they don't go to college, there's women's rec teams, right? We need more girls in this to stay in the sport, because you
Mhm.
see so many playing prep wheelchair basketball, and then varsity dwindles down. And then when you're a college coach and you're recruiting, the numbers are even smaller.
Yes,
And
there.
you're like, where did these girls go? Like, I
Mhm.
just saw them. Where did they go? Right.
Yeah.
So I just would encourage treating them as equal
Mhm.
and find, with as with any athlete, right? Even
Yes.
a
Mhm.
boy athlete, you're going to find their strength and play to that, hopefully. So do that with our girls too.
Yeah. Yeah, I really feel like junior coaches have a lot of responsibility of the longevity and the success of those athletes. But I go back to the book of the Power of Moments, and in the book Power of the Moments, they talk about it's not about what you're saying, but it's how you make them feel.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's a lot of the experiences that the young players that don't stay in the sport, is it wasn't anything about what the coach said, but it might have been what they made them feel like. And maybe it was something they said that made them feel a certain way. And, I think they've got to be in the macro view, looking at how are you making the athletes feel,
Yeah.
and truly understanding that when we're talking about the fundamentals of player development, there's fun in that fundamentals, and that you have to make these practices fun because they're
Yes.
playing a game. And we're so focused on success is being winning games and dominating teams and stuff. And it's like that. I mean, kids coming to me and saying I had so much fun winning prep nationals when I was like 12. I'm like, that's great and all, but that does nothing for the longevity of you being a better basketball player.
Right.
So yeah, it's really important for them to make sure that they're keeping this fun for the kids.
Correct.
Yeah.
And that's what it is, right? And think of like your own any youth sport, right? I have
Mhm.
a 9-year-old now that plays youth sport, and like,
Yeah.
once he's not having fun in it anymore, I don't know if that's the sport for him.
Yep.
And if I'm a parent of a girl that's not having fun in a sport, I might pull her out, in wheelchair
Mhm.
basketball if she's miserable in it. So
Yeah.
that's a really good reminder. And put the fun in fundamentals. Like, you have
Yep.
to, like, it doesn't matter if you win a national title as a junior coach.
Right.
I know that's
Right.
maybe an unpopular opinion.
Yeah.
Um,
There's gonna be some coaches in here that are like, no, I don't agree, but
They're gonna be
I,
mad at me. They're gonna be like,
yeah.
because you didn't win one, like, you're right, I didn't.
Yeah.
But when I was coaching in Denver, one of my proudest moments is I had 10 athletes one year. 5 of them were girls and 5 of them were boys. Like,
Yeah.
I had a balanced team, and I could put any of them together on the floor. But at one
Mhm.
point, I put 5 girls on the floor, and they were a defensive machine. And
Yes.
three of those three of those girls went on to play college basketball,
Yep.
right? And one's on the hockey national team, like,
Awesome.
and one's trying to get into college, right? So
Mhm.
they had a lot of fun. They had fun with each other, like,
Yeah.
we had fun when I coached juniors, and that's not just because of me. It's also because of like the parents and the whole experience. But some of my proudest moments was with that squad, and our girls and our boys lineups. But I didn't always
Yeah.
play it that way. But every once in a while, we'd shake it up and we'd throw it in there. But
Yeah. Well, let me ask you, as a juniors or as a college coach, you've got an opportunity to work with some athletes that are beginning athletes. What's your go-to defensively focused drill, and what's your go-to offensively focused drill? What's the one that you think you're going to be able to get the most out of it? You're going to engage them the most. Maybe you're going to pull the most fun out of it. What's that thing that you go to?
well, it's not fun. Nobody likes it. It's one-on-one shadow.
Hey, nice, nice.
Defense, right? Like
Yeah.
it's
Why? Why?
fundamental.
Mm,
It's the
yeah.
basic building block of defense, right? If
Yeah.
you can play one-on-one defense and then you can communicate, then you can play two-on-two defense, and then you can build all the way up to 5-on-5, which is our ultimate goal, right? To
Yeah.
be 5 defenders, one team, working as a unit.
Yeah.
So for me, it's one-on-one shadow. And athletes hate it. I hated it as an athlete, but I also loved it. Like I loved the
Sure.
challenge of it. You have to be pretty intrinsically motivated, I think, to do it, because
Yeah.
I mean, what do you win out of it? You
Right.
finished.
Yeah.
Right?
You survived. Yeah. Yeah.
You survived.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. And then offensively, I'm trying to think of what one of my, I don't
Well, while
know.
you think of it, I want to share too with the one-on-one shadow stuff. There's so many small details that you can add for an elite athlete, and so many broad ones you can bring for a beginner in that drill. And that, when we think about top athletes in the world, they're still doing one-on-one shadow, right? Like it's not a drill that's only for beginner players. Everybody at every level is able to run that. So there's no, I'm too cool for one-on-one shadow. No, if you don't do it, you're not going to be ready to play defense.
Yep.
The other thing is that it's a confidence builder. Is that the more you get good at one-on-one shadow and doing individual defense, the more you're not worried about stopping somebody in defense. And the idea of going from being a defender defending one-on-one to then defending 1.5 people, where I get to defend somebody and also help on a secondary person. Now you're making your team stronger, because you're like, hey, I can handle 2 guys or 2 ladies in one situation, so that you can go somewhere else and you can fix it. It's just a great confidence builder.
Yeah,
Yeah.
100%.
Yeah.
Sometimes it's a confidence killer, depending on who you're going against.
And then you got to
But
keep
then
doing
you
it.
can
You
make
got to
those
keep doing it.
adjustments
Yes.
and you get
Yep.
better, right? Like
Yeah.
that's the thing that you have to remind your athletes too. Like, I'm not doing this to punish you. It's so that you get better. And don't you
Sure.
want to get better? Don't you want to win a
Yeah.
junior national championship?
Come on. Yeah. And I think for some of the coaches that are listening, some variations of one-on-one shadow that you could add in there. You can add in with or without a basketball. Without a basketball, it's going to be harder than with a basketball, because you're going to slow down the offensive player. Some of the fun ones that we've added in here, I did one just recently with the guys, is one-on-one handoff, which is actually 2 really fast players, and then one might be a little bit slower, but you want them to build up confidence. And the 2 fast players are doing a one-on-one shadow. And as soon as the defensive player stops them, they hand off that matchup to the slower player. And now they're on their own to try to defend a fast one that's stationary. And if they get in trouble, the fast player comes in, stops them, and then they hand them off again. So it's an opportunity to go, I don't have to just find the slowest person so that I have to get a stop. I can defend the fastest person and still be okay. It's been really interesting to try to see the athletes process that and see what how it develops in a game.
Yeah, that's
Yeah.
good. That's
Yeah.
building that ladder, right? They
It really
already are
is.
at this level. Get them up
Uh-huh.
here. Um,
Yeah.
and for me, offensively, I mean, I stick to a lot of fundamentals. I mean, I don't know if it's, I like 3-man weave, right?
Sure.
It's passing. You can throw
Yeah.
a dribble in there. Everybody can do it, right?
Mhm.
And it's also learning how to work together, right? You can't go sprinting ahead of somebody. You have to
Mhm.
stay together as a team. You get a layup in the end, which is
Yep.
rewarding in
Yep.
itself, right? And making the good pass. And then it also teaches you how to create space, right? You're getting
Right.
wide. My athletes always have to touch the sideline, right? They have
Yes.
to touch the
Mhm.
sideline. So offensively, that's something that I like to. There's tons of drills. I mean,
Mhm.
I have books of. I know you do too as a coach, but
Sure.
but that's when I think of fundamentals, because that's what we're talking about. I think that's one of the basic fundamental ones that I really like to teach even early on. And you're going to have lots of different skill levels in there. And if you're
Yeah.
coaching juniors, you know that for sure. I mean, some kids
Mhm.
aren't even ready to catch yet, but that's one where they can work on catching and moving.
Yep.
And the older, if there's a more advanced kid in that, maybe they have to take a dribble before they pass it, right? Because they have to wait for somebody, right? But they also have to learn patience in that.
Yeah.
And they have to learn, like how to pass, know your personnel,
Yep.
KYP, right?
Hmm.
Can't give somebody that's not very skilled yet at catching a pass that's way over their head. Maybe you got to put it between their knees and their nose. So there's so much learning that can happen in
Yeah.
3-man weave, which is like seems so basic and fundamental, but
Right.
then you can build on that and go up to 4, 5, 7,
Mhm.
9, right? Like you can do all these things,
Yeah.
and it
Yeah.
takes communication, and it takes patience, and it takes basketball smarts too,
Yes.
right? Like you have to be thinking in that, right? Like, oh, the 7 people, I got to go behind 3. Like you
Right.
have to, it builds all of those things when
Mhm.
you just with that basic drill.
Yeah. Two big things for the 3-person weave, especially for the coaches that are teaching kids that are just starting through on it, is like having proper expectations of what they're going to get out of it. Is that you're not looking for them to do 3-person weave 20 times down the floor, the ball doesn't touch the ground and they've got to make the layup. It's like, okay, way too much. But then also having a why involved in this, because there's going to be a lot of these younger players that are going, yeah, I know what 3-person weave is, but I don't like it because I don't know what I'm doing or why are we doing this. And so you've got to have a why involved in a lot of these drills. Is that we're doing 3-person weave because it's really great to cross when defenders are going to be coming after you so you can get loose. And it might be ones where I'm going to help the ball handler get away from defenders. And then it could just be ball handling in general, that we've got to find a way of getting the ball up the floor. And sometimes we struggle doing that. So this is why we're doing it. So having a why and good expectations are huge.
I will just kind of piggyback off of that
Yeah.
I think a lot of times this generation needs a why, right? Like,
Well, yeah.
right? And
Mhm.
that's valid.
Yeah.
Sometimes I didn't know why I was doing drills. I just
Yep.
didn't ask. I just did it, right?
Yeah.
So just make sure that you do have those whys
Mhm.
in your back pocket, and I think that that's important. I mean, it helps you too. Like, yeah, why am I doing this drill?
Yeah.
What are we getting out of this, rather than just running up and down the court? And that's important.
Yeah.
And
The
I would
era
say women
of
necessarily really do need the why.
yeah. 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 And this is in the era is gone of do it because I said so coaching.
Yeah.
It's gone. You don't have that anymore. And if you're still coaching that way, you're losing your players.
Yes.
So you've got to be able to, when you put together a practice plan, have a why. And for a majority of us that are coaching at a collegiate level, we're running a drill and we have 3 or 4 key things that we're looking for in that drill. And they know why we're looking for those, because we didn't do that last week when we had a game, or we're looking forward to the next game and when we want to get better at it. There's always a
Yes.
why involved or we lose them.
Right.
Yeah.
100%.
Yeah. Now, when you were coaching with Whitewater and thinking about player development, what was the use of video or technology? Did you have any use of it? And was it good or bad for you when you used it?
I love video.
Mm-hmm.
So for me, we used a service called Huddle, which
Yeah.
I'm sure you're familiar with.
Yeah.
But
Not
like you could,
sponsored. Not sponsored.
not sponsored.
Yeah. Yeah.
No, we paid for it.
Yeah.
Um, but it was super useful. I
Sure.
really, if I could say that I wish that I did something better, was use video more often,
Mm-hmm.
and had the time to break down more video when I was coaching
Yeah.
collegiately. So I'm excited for that opportunity with Team USA, because it's one of my favorite things to do, actually, because I think it's invaluable, because you can show people what they're doing well,
Yeah.
number one, right?
Yeah.
Because at every level, people want to know what they're doing right,
Mm-hmm.
because I think we're all our own worst critics, right? And so
Yes.
you can pull plays that were done perfectly, and then you want to emulate those, right? And you can show exactly why, and that kind of thing. But then you can also, when there's big glaring mistakes, you can make those adjustments as well. And then also for me, I love watching other teams' tendencies, or specifically other athletes' tendencies.
Yeah.
So, when I go into game planning, I already kind of know some athlete tendencies, and I try to communicate that to the athletes. But then if I can show that as well, have that why I'm saying that, that I think is a big part. It's a great tool for that. So, and then also just building on things, right? Maybe at one point in the season, you're working on your half court defense, and then you're watching video and you're like, we're really pretty good at this. Maybe we can extend it, right? And showing the athletes how they could extend it. Or maybe, we have an athlete that's afraid to jump or make contact. Show them that they're able to do that, right? Like show them where on the court specifically they can do these things. So, I don't know. I think it's pretty invaluable. And I think most coaches would say that it is.
Yeah.
I didn't use it much on the junior level just because you don't have the technology, you're a volunteer,
Right.
all those things. But at the college level for sure.
Yeah. And I think for practice for me, at least once a week, I'm pulling my phone out and I'm recording an athlete, either doing a shooting form or a drill or something, so that after they get done with it, I can explain what I see and I show them exactly what's happening on there, and see, you can see this, see that. We have such an incredible device in our hands all the time. Being able to use it is great. And what I'm really excited about with this whole Axe the Caster thing is I'm also going to be working with a app called Boosta that's going to be having a bunch of different drills and skills that athletes can subscribe to the app, and then they record themselves doing the drill, and I give them one-on-one feedback on their actions. So they'll be able to have access to me pretty much all the time on their individual drills, and that could be at a practice or that could be one-on-one. So I'm really looking forward to adding that to this channel and this program.
That's awesome. And and I did do that too. When I first started coaching collegiately, I did all my practice planning on my iPad. And so then it was like, it was already there. So like I would film a drill or an individual athlete, and they're, like you said, they're shooting form or something like that. And then it was instant, like, this is what I'm talking about,
Yeah.
But I didn't do it as much. Then I went back to paper and pencil, old school. So
Old school. Yeah.
But your phone is right there too. And I did pull up the phone, and I forgot that, that was actually a great tool every once in a while when you were really kind of on an athlete, like, quit doing this. And like, I don't know that I'm doing it.
Yeah. Because they don't see themselves from the outside view. And they're like, I felt like that was a good shot. And I was like, your hand was in front of your face when you shot that. What do you mean? You didn't even see the rim. We got to change that. Yeah. Well, I guess with technology, then moving into, what do you see as the future in wheelchair basketball when it comes to development? And a couple of things that come to mind for me is like, we talked about access to strength and conditioning and mental health training and stuff like that. Is there anything that you're kind of seeing on the horizon, or maybe in some of your research with video and stuff, that there are going to be new things in the future that are going to change wheelchair basketball?
With technology?
Or with anything? Yeah, this is thinking about just the future of wheelchair basketball.
Well, I mean, I think technology, like chair technology, is like ever evolving, right?
Yes.
We didn't even have 5th and 6th wheels. Like I didn't get a 6th wheel until like a couple years ago. So
yeah, I didn't know that 5th wheels were going to get old so fast. Yeah, you blinked and it was like, you only have a 5th wheel? What is that?
Right. Yeah. And I have athletes that are like, you didn't play with a 5th wheel? You just, would you fall over all the time? Well, yeah. I did. So yeah, chair technology obviously is always changing, strapping systems, things like that. I think that that's going to continue to evolve. I'm not going to say that I would think that we're almost like at a perfect level, because then you see like carbon fiber, like seats and things like that. And some people are being like molded to their chairs, which, whoa. Right.
Yeah. What are you thinking about the extended range of shooting? Like in our generation of juniors, there was very few people that were launching threes. And now I feel like every junior team has at least 4 to 5 athletes that have that kind of range, or they're attempting that kind of range. What are your thoughts on that?
I think there's a lot of influence of like watching the NBA, right? That's the flashy stuff.
Yeah.
That's the threes, right? And if you're good at that, like, and you can hone that skill, that's great. But there's nothing like a good pick and roll to get your coach excited, right?
Yes.
Like, and a layup.
It's
the highest percentage shot in basketball. But I think that it's a lot to do with the influence of the NBA. I mean, that's the basketball that we see right now most, right?
Sure.
Like, and I haven't watched college basketball much actually in the last couple of years, so I don't know what that's looking like right now. But
Yeah.
besides wheelchair basketball, but I agree with you that there's a lot more shooting range, and I don't know how I feel about that. I mean, I was a
Yeah.
3-point shooter, so like
Mhm.
I get excited about it, but I don't always think I'm excited about it when it's the right shot.
Sure.
Right.
And how do you know that?
Are you open? Is it
Uh-huh.
within your range?
Uh-huh.
Is it something that you've practiced? Is it a high
Uh,
percentage shot for you?
yes. Yes.
So, like you said, people are attempting them, but that doesn't mean that
Mhm.
you're good at it, right? It takes a lot of shooting to get good at shooting 3-pointers. Um, and just because you're good at shooting 3-pointers, don't ignore the other shots,
Yeah.
is what I'm going to say.
Yeah.
But I mean, with, yeah, I guess that's that.
Yeah. And I would say too, on 3-point training for junior players, youth players, if you're having to change your shooting form to get that ball in that position, you're outside your shooting range.
Yes.
You've got to be able to shoot comfortably in your normal form and then start to stretch yourself out. And if it's just inside the 3-point line is when you start to give a little push or an extra shoulder, then you bring it in and you start to work on that and you develop that. Yeah. And also, if you've got to go Mach 10 from one baseline to the other to launch the three, it is outside your range too. So you definitely don't put those up. But
Right.
I'm excited to see the development of more 3-point shooters in it. But then the further we extend, the unique thing with wheelchair basketball is there's no elevation increase. Like, we're not going to get better at getting up higher. It's always
Right.
going to be, if you're big, and the chair is going to keep you at the level that you're at. So big players developing themselves in the post, don't work on your 3 balls, work on your post play and being able to catch with one hand and shoot with one hand. That's what size needs, is it needs to work on the inside.
That's right.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Absolutely. I mean, if you can work on it at the end of practice,
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
right? But
Yeah.
yeah, like hone your skill, right? I mean, you're right. We aren't going to get any bigger, and I think, we don't shoot with the same angles as someone that's standing up. So,
Yeah.
I think it is really important that you said that if it's outside your range, it's not a good shot, right?
Right.
And you're you're forcing it. Don't change your shot. Be
Yeah.
patient with your shot, because I wasn't
Mhm.
shooting threes when I was 15.
Right. Right. Yeah,
Yeah,
it be screenshots at 15 feet is a really good spot to show like where your range is. And if that's a struggle, then you've got to work on some pick and rolls and start finishing some layups, and
that's
then
right.
work on that exchange.
That's right.
Last thing I would say in the development of it, and we're going back to the idea of fun and the fundamental, is that you've got to have a plan of what you're going to be doing for shooting development when it comes to that range. But there are also a couple of practices or shoot around times where you just got to screw around and have some fun. And
Thank
that's where you
you.
start to find new shots and new ways of putting shots up. I go back to, working and playing with Brian Bell, and the unique things that he was able to do in practices and games were things where he was just kind of messing around after practice and, doing what he would call like a side fade or something like that, and do some like crazy shot. And it looked crazy to us, but he had already done it 30 or 40 times during that day and was just getting a feel for it. Play around a little bit, have some fun.
Absolutely, because you never know when you're going to find yourself in that situation. I remember
Yeah.
even, I did weird stuff too, like that I would just
Yeah.
flip something up and it would go in, but it's because I got hit all the time. I had to figure out how to get it up there so I could get a free
Yeah.
throw, or, you
Mm-hmm.
know, so, be a gym rat.
Yes.
That's the biggest thing, right? Like, get your workout done and then play, right? Like,
Mm-hmm.
work, work hard, play hard.
Love it. Love it. Well, I really loved and enjoyed the conversation we had, but we've got to finish off with what we do here. That's going to be our KYC instead of a KYP, but it's Know Your Coach. And so I've
Oh,
got some rapid fire questions for you. We'll just kind of get to know you a little bit more when we finish up here, and then we'll call it a podcast.
all right.
First question: what are you reading right now?
Well, it's an audiobook, so I don't know if that counts.
That's fine.
It's called Do Hard Things by Steve Magnus.
Okay.
And it's
Anything you're getting from that yet?
In chapter 2 right now, but
Okay.
it is about coaching styles and being authoritarian versus um, not basically
Yeah.
and it works better. And so it has a lot of science based to it as well.
Mhm.
And it's just talking about athlete performance and how it's affected by coaching styles. And so I'm reading that right now, and
Love it.
I'm really excited about it actually.
Awesome. Well, the next one then is kind of goes into that is what are you listening to? But is there any podcast that you listen to or music that you like, something that you are listening to right now?
um I'm all over the place music wise.
Yeah.
It just depends on my mood. So there's nothing. I mean, I'm wearing a flannel. I'm in the 90s like alternative rock right now.
Love
And
it.
I'm dressing
Yeah.
for it. Um, but I just listen, I guess with a podcast, every morning I listen to a podcast called What a Day, and it just gives me, it's like a 20 to 25-minute podcast, and it talks about the news from the day before. So
Okay.
boring.
Good to be informed. I like it.
That's right.
Yeah. Yeah. What are you watching right now? TV, movies, or any kind of like maybe instructional stuff?
Ted Lasso.
Ted Lasso. Love it. Are you just
That's what I'm
starting it?
watching
Are you
right now.
rewatching it? What are you doing?
I'm in season 2, actually. I kind of stumbled upon it late, comparatively to everyone else, and I'm in love with it. And I don't get a lot of time to watch adult shows because otherwise I'm watching Bluey.
Makes sense. Makes
Yeah.
sense. It's about the same, right? Ted Lasso,
Right.
Bluey. It's all the same stuff.
All
Yeah.
the same. It's all
Yeah. Oh
positive.
yeah. I watched the first couple episodes of season 1 of Ted Lasso and then just stayed up and watched all of it. Just blew through both seasons. Could not stop watching it. Love it. And
So
super
good.
excited for season 3. Yeah.
Yeah. I just heard that on the radio today that there's a season 3. I was like, yes.
Yes, I know. I know. Okay, we're getting heavy with the last 2 questions.
Okay.
You ready? Okay. What's the best piece of advice that you've received from a coach or a person that you looked up to?
Ooh, oh
Mhm.
man. This is very fitting because I've been, reaching out to mentors a lot lately just because I'm in a new area of life again, like new
Yeah.
job, but also with coaching too. And um, I recently was told to do it my way.
Mhm.
And that's what I'm going to do. So I think that was kind of told to me too as an athlete, but now being told to do it my way as a coach is invaluable.
Yeah, definitely a confidence booster, right? Is
Yeah.
that person's telling you do it your way because they believe in you that you're going to be doing it the right way.
Yeah.
Yeah. Awesome. Last one. What are you grateful for?
What am I not grateful for?
Yeah.
I am grateful for all of the support that has gotten me this far, right? With my family, with my spouse, with my children, my parents, my friends. I have wonderful friends. So I'm grateful for all of those things.
Awesome. Well, thank you again for having the conversation with me. I'm grateful for you and your time sharing with me and with everyone that's listening here, and also looking forward to having another conversation with you in the future.
Yeah, let's do it.
Yeah, awesome. Thank
All
you.
right. Thanks.